The scream tore through the small boarding house room like a knife through silk, and Caleb Monroe was on his feet before his eyes were fully open, his hand instinctively reaching for the hunting knife at his belt. It was 1876, and the mountain town of Silver Ridge, Colorado, had seen its share of violence. But this sound was different, primal, and terrified in a way that made his chest tighten. He had arrived just that evening, coming down from his trap lines in the high country to trade pelts and resupply, and now he stood in the narrow hallway, his massive frame filling the doorway as he listened to the sound of frantic movement from the room next to his. Another scream pierced the night, followed by the sound of something crashing to the floor. Caleb's dark hair, which fell past his shoulders in waves he rarely bothered to tame, shifted as he turned his head toward the door. His muscled arms, bare beneath his rolled-up shirt sleeves despite the October chill, tensed as he debated whether to intervene. The mountains had taught him to mind his own business, but they had also taught him that some cries for help could not be ignored. The door to the neighboring room flew open, and a woman stumbled into the hallway, her nightgown twisted around her slender frame, her auburn hair wild and tangled. Her eyes were open but unseeing, her face pale as fresh snow in the dim lamplight. She collided with the opposite wall, her hands clawing at nothing, her breath coming in ragged gasps that spoke of pure terror. "Please," she whimpered, though she didn't seem to see Caleb standing just feet away. "Please, no more. I cannot bear it." Caleb moved toward her carefully, his massive hands held out in a gesture meant to soothe rather than threaten. "Miss," he said, his voice low and steady, the kind of tone he used to calm spooked horses or wounded animals. "Miss, you're safe. Whatever you're seeing, it is not real." She did not respond, instead sliding down the wall until she sat crumpled on the rough wooden floor, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken inside her. Caleb crouched down, making himself smaller, less threatening, though at 6 feet 4 inches, with shoulders like an ox and arms thick with muscle. From years of swinging an axe and hauling traps through mountain snow, there was only so much he could do to diminish his presence. The boarding house owner, a gray-haired woman named Mrs. Hutchins, appeared at the top of the stairs, her wrapper clutched around her thin frame. "Oh, Miss Waverly," she said, her voice filled with a weariness that spoke of many such nights. "Not again." "This happens often?" Caleb asked, not taking his eyes from the trembling woman before him. "Every night since she arrived 3 weeks ago," Mrs. Hutchins said, moving closer with the practiced calm of someone who had dealt with this many times before. "The doctor says she has night terrors. Poor dear cannot seem to sleep more than an hour before they take her." Caleb watched as Mrs. Hutchins knelt beside the woman she had called Miss Waverly and began speaking softly, her weathered hands gentle on the younger woman's shoulders. Slowly, incrementally, awareness seemed to seep back into those wild green eyes, and Miss Waverly blinked, looked around, and then buried her face in her hands with a sound of such profound shame and exhaustion that Caleb felt something twist in his chest. "I am so sorry," Miss Waverly whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. "I am so terribly sorry." "Hush now," Mrs. Hutchins said. "Let us get you back to bed." "I cannot," Miss Waverly said, and there was desperation in her voice. "I cannot go back to sleep. I cannot face them again." Caleb stood, backing away to give them space, but he found he could not return to his own room. Instead, he watched as Mrs. Hutchins helped Miss Waverly to her feet and guided her back into her room. The door closed, and he could hear the low murmur of voices, the older woman's soothing and the younger woman's broken with tears. When Mrs. Hutchins emerged a few minutes later, Caleb was still standing in the hallway. She looked at him with tired eyes that held both gratitude and resignation. "Thank you for not causing a fuss," she said. "Some of the other boarders have not been so understanding. I have had 3 people leave because of the disturbances." "What happened to her?" Caleb asked, though he knew it was not his place to inquire. Mrs. Hutchins sighed, glancing back at the closed door. "She came here from Kansas. Her family's farm was attacked by raiders during the border wars years back. She saw things no person should see, especially not a young girl. She was only 14 when it happened. Lost her parents, her 2 younger brothers. She managed to hide, but she heard everything, saw the aftermath." Caleb felt his jaw tighten. He had seen violence in his years, had fought in a few skirmishes himself during his younger days, but the thought of a child witnessing such horror made his blood run cold. She's been traveling since, trying to find a place where she might feel safe enough to settle, Mrs. Hutchins continued. But the terrors follow her, every night without fail. The doctor says there's nothing to be done except let them run their course. He gave her laudanum, but she will not take it, says it makes the nightmares worse, traps her inside them. She is alone? Completely. No family left, no husband. She works as a seamstress during the day, does beautiful work too. But she is wasting away from lack of sleep. I can see it happening, a little more each day. Caleb nodded slowly, his mind turning over this information. He should leave it alone, he knew. He had learned long ago that getting involved in other people's troubles rarely ended well. He had his trap lines to check, his solitary life in a cabin high in the mountains where the only sounds were wind and water and the occasional cry of an eagle. He had built that life deliberately, after years of disappointment and loss had taught him that solitude was safer than connection. But as he lay in his bed an hour later, listening to the sounds of muffled crying from the next room, he found sleep elusive. He thought about the terror in those green eyes, the way her whole body had shaken with fear and exhaustion. He thought about what it must be like to be afraid of sleep, to know that closing your eyes meant facing demons that no amount of waking courage could banish. When the sun rose over the peaks the next morning, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Caleb had made a decision. He found Mrs. Hutchins in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for her boarders. "I would like to speak with Miss Waverly," he said, "if she is willing." Mrs. Hutchins studied him with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Why?" "I might be able to help." "You're not going to try to sell her some snake oil cure, are you? Because I will not stand for her being taken advantage of." "No, ma'am, nothing like that. I just want to talk to her." Mrs. Hutchins considered this for a long moment, then nodded. "She usually comes down around 8 for tea before heading to the dress shop where she works. You can speak with her then, but I will be present." "I would expect nothing less." Miss Waverly appeared just after 8, and in the morning light, Caleb could see details he had missed in the chaos of the night. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with fine features that would have been beautiful if not for the dark circles under her eyes and the hollow look of someone who had not truly rested in a very long time. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore a simple dark green dress that brought out the color of her eyes. She moved carefully, as if afraid of taking up too much space or drawing too much attention. When she saw Caleb sitting at the kitchen table, his large frame making the furniture look small and delicate, she stopped, and color rose in her pale cheeks. "I must apologize for last night," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I did not mean to disturb your rest." "You have nothing to apologize for," Caleb said, rising to his feet. "Please sit. I wanted to speak with you, if you are willing." She glanced at Mrs. Hutchins, who nodded encouragingly, then took a seat across from him. Up close, he could see the tremor in her hands as she folded them on the table. "My name is Caleb Monroe," he said. "I live up in the high country, trapping mostly, hunting some. I come to town maybe once a month to trade and get supplies." "Eleanor Waverly," she replied, "though I suppose you already knew that." "Mrs. Hutchins told me a bit about your situation, about the night terrors." Eleanor's jaw tightened, and she looked away. "I am sure that must have been an illuminating conversation. I imagine the whole town knows by now that I am the woman who cannot sleep without screaming like a madwoman." "I do not think you are mad," Caleb said. "I think you are carrying a burden that would break most people." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw surprise in her eyes at his words. "That is kind of you to say, but it does not change the reality. I've seen 3 different doctors. They all say the same thing. There is no cure for what ails me. I simply have to endure it." "What if you did not have to endure it alone?" Eleanor frowned. "I do not understand." Caleb leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table. "From what I understand, the terrors come when you are asleep. Your mind takes you back to that place, to those memories, and you cannot escape until you wake." "Yes," she whispered. "So what you need is someone to wake you, someone to pull you out before the terror takes full hold." "I cannot expect Mrs. Hutchins to sit by my bedside every night. She has a business to run, and she needs her own rest." "I was not suggesting Mrs. Hutchins." Eleanor stared at him, comprehension dawning slowly in her tired eyes. You? But why would you do such a thing? You do not even know me. Caleb was quiet for a moment, trying to find the words to explain something he did not fully understand himself. I have spent the last 10 years alone in the mountains, he finally said. I chose that life because it was simpler than dealing with people, with their expectations and disappointments. But last night when I heard you scream, I realized that maybe I have been alone too long. Maybe there is still something in me that wants to help, that needs to matter to someone. That is very noble, Eleanor said, and there was a trace of bitterness in her voice. But I am not a charity case, Mr. Monroe. I do not need pity. It is not pity, Caleb said firmly. It is respect. What you survived would have killed most people, but you are still here, still fighting. That takes a kind of strength I admire. So let me help you fight. Let me stay awake so you can sleep. Eleanor shook her head. It is impossible. You cannot stay awake all night, every night. You would collapse from exhaustion yourself. I do not need as much sleep as most people. The mountains teach you to get by on less, and I'm only in town for a few days. Let me try to help you for that time. Maybe if you can get a few nights of real rest, it will make a difference. Mrs. Hutchins, who had been listening to this entire exchange while pretending to busy herself with breakfast preparations, spoke up. It might help, Eleanor. You know the doctor said that the lack of sleep is making the terrors worse. If you could just rest properly for a few nights, it might break the cycle. Eleanor looked between them, and Caleb could see the war playing out in her expression, pride fighting against desperate hope, fear of trusting against the need for help. How would it even work? She asked finally. You cannot sit in my room all night. It would be entirely improper. I can sit in the hallway outside your door, Caleb said. I will hear if you start to have a terror, and I can wake you before it gets too bad. The hallway floor is hard and cold. I have slept on mountainsides in the snow, Miss Waverly. A hallway floor will be a luxury. She studied him for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face as if looking for some hidden motive or deceit. He let her look, having nothing to hide. Just for a few nights? She asked. Just until I head back to my cabin, 4 or 5 days at most? And you want nothing in return? I want to see if we can help you sleep. That is all. Eleanor took a shaky breath, and Caleb saw tears gathering in her eyes, though she blinked them back fiercely. I am so tired, she whispered. I am so very tired. Sometimes I think about what it would be like to just close my eyes and not wake up at all. Do not think that way, Caleb said, and there was an intensity in his voice that made her look up. The world needs you in it, Miss Waverly. You survived for a reason. What reason could possibly justify what I have endured? I do not know yet, but I think we are meant to find out. That evening, after Eleanor returned from her work at the dress shop, Caleb made a bed of sorts in the hallway using blankets and a pillow that Mrs. Hutchins provided. Eleanor watched from her doorway, her expression uncertain. You really mean to do this, she said. I gave you my word. I do not even know you. Then this will be a good opportunity to get acquainted, Caleb said with a slight smile. It was the first time she had seen him smile, and she was struck by how it transformed his face, softening the hard edges that years in the wilderness had carved there. What do I do? She asked. You go to sleep just as you normally would. I will be right here. If I hear you starting to have a terror, I will wake you. We will try it and see what happens. Eleanor nodded slowly, then retreated into her room. Caleb heard her moving around, the rustle of fabric, the creak of the bed. Then silence. He settled himself against the wall, his long legs stretched out before him, and prepared to wait. The first nightmare came just after midnight. Caleb had been dozing lightly, the way he did in the mountains when he needed to stay alert for predators, when he heard the change in her breathing. It became rapid and shallow, and then she made a small sound of distress. He was on his feet and knocking on her door before she could fully scream. Miss Waverly, he called. Eleanor, wake up. You are dreaming. The door flew open, and she stood there, her eyes wild but not unseeing this time. She was breathing hard, her hand clutched to her chest. I was there again, she gasped. I could smell the smoke, I could hear them. But you are not there now, Caleb said steadily. You are here, in Silver Ridge, and you are safe. I am right here, and nothing is going to hurt you. Eleanor focused on his face, on his solid presence, and slowly her breathing began to calm. "You woke me," she said wonderingly. "Before it got bad, you actually woke me. That was the plan. But how did you know? I'd only just started dreaming." "I could hear the change in your breathing. Years of hunting teach you to pay attention to small sounds." She looked at him, and something shifted in her expression. Not quite trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. "Thank you," she said softly. "Go back to sleep. I will be right here." The second nightmare came 2 hours later, and again Caleb woke her before the full terror could take hold. By the third time, just before dawn, Eleanor appeared at her door before he could even knock. "I heard you get up," she said. "I was already waking." "Good. That means you are starting to recognize when the dreams are beginning." "I feel strange," Eleanor said. "Tired, but not the same way I usually do. I actually slept some. Real sleep, not just darkness filled with horror." "That is good. That is very good." As the sun began to rise, Eleanor stood in her doorway looking at Caleb, who had not slept at all but showed no signs of fatigue. His dark eyes were alert, his massive frame relaxed, but ready. "I do not understand why you are doing this," she said. "Maybe I do not fully understand it myself yet," he admitted, "but I know it feels right." The pattern continued for 3 more nights. Each night, Caleb sat in the hallway while Eleanor slept, and each time she began to slip into a nightmare, he woke her. By the 4th night, she was able to go nearly 3 hours between episodes, and when she woke, the terror in her eyes was less absolute, fading faster as she recognized where she was. During the days, they began to talk. Eleanor would sit with him in the boarding house parlor before she went to work, and Caleb would tell her stories about life in the mountains. He spoke of winters so harsh that the snow piled higher than his cabin roof, of tracking elk through forests so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat, of nights when the stars seemed close enough to touch. Eleanor listened with an attention that made him realize how much he had missed having someone to share these things with. In turn, Eleanor told him about her life before the tragedy. She had been a happy child, she said, with a gift for sewing that her mother had encouraged. She described summer evenings on the farm in Kansas, fireflies dancing in the dusk, her brothers chasing each other through fields of wheat. She had been planning to become a teacher, had loved books and learning. "And then everything ended in one night," she said quietly. They were sitting in the parlor on the 4th afternoon, and rain was falling softly outside the windows. "I have tried so hard to move past it, to build a new life, but I cannot escape. Every night, I'm that frightened girl again, hiding in the cellar while the world burns above me." "You are not that girl anymore," Caleb said. "You are a woman who survived something terrible and kept going. That takes courage." "It does not feel like courage. It feels like cowardice, like I am running from something I should face." "How are you supposed to face memories? They are not tangible enemies you can fight." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "The doctor in Denver told me I need to talk about what happened. He said keeping it locked inside makes it worse. But how can I speak of such things? How can I burden someone else with those images?" "Maybe the burden is lighter when it is shared," Caleb said. "I am not a doctor, Miss Waverly. I am just a mountain man who knows more about animals than people. But I know that wounds fester when they are kept covered and hidden. Sometimes they need air and light to heal." She looked at him, and he saw something raw and vulnerable in her eyes. "If I tell you, if I speak of it out loud, will you think less of me for not having done more, for having hidden while my family died?" "You were a child," Caleb said firmly. "A child. There was nothing you could have done except die with them, and I do not think your parents would have wanted that. I think they would be proud that you survived, that you are still here fighting to live." Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks then, and she did not try to stop them. "I have never said that out loud, that I feel guilty for living." "Then maybe it is time." Over the next hour, in that quiet parlor with rain drumming on the roof, Eleanor told him everything. She described the sound of the raiders coming, the way her father had shoved her and her brothers toward the cellar, telling them to hide and be silent. She spoke of how her brothers had been too frightened to stay quiet, how they had cried, and how one of the raiders had heard and found them. She told him how they had dragged her brothers out, how she had pressed herself into the smallest, darkest corner and somehow remained unnoticed in the shadows. She described the sounds, the terrible sounds, and the smell of smoke, and how she had stayed hidden for hours after everything went silent, too terrified to move. Caleb listened without interrupting, his face grave but his eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, her voice hoarse and her eyes swollen from crying, he reached out and took her hand. His hand was huge, rough with calluses, but his touch was gentle. "You survived," he said, "and that took strength. Do not ever let anyone, including yourself, tell you otherwise." Eleanor gripped his hand like a lifeline. "I'm so tired of being afraid. Fear is not a weakness. It means you are alive, that you still care about living. We just need to teach you how to live with it, how to not let it control you." That night, the 5th night of his vigil, something changed. Eleanor went to sleep as usual, and Caleb took up his position in the hallway. But when the nightmare began, nearly 4 hours into her sleep, Eleanor woke herself before Caleb could reach her door. She appeared in the doorway, her face pale but composed. "I did it," she said, wonder in her voice. "I realized I was dreaming, and I woke myself up." Caleb felt pride swell in his chest. "That's remarkable. And the dream was different. I was still there in the cellar, but I could also hear your voice, telling me I was safe, that I was not there anymore. It helped. It pulled me out." "Good. That is very good." Eleanor sat down beside him in the hallway, not caring about propriety or what anyone might think. "I want you to know that what you have done for me these past few days has changed everything. For the first time in 8 years, I feel like maybe I can learn to live with this. Like maybe I can have a real life." "You can," Caleb said. "You will." She turned to look at him, studying his profile in the dim light. "Why are you alone up in those mountains, Caleb? A man like you should have a family, a home." He was quiet for a long moment. "I was married once," he finally said. "Long time ago, before I came to Colorado. Her name was Sarah. We met when I was 20, and I thought she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. We got married, planned to start a farm in Missouri, but Sarah got sick that first winter. Fever took her in a matter of days. I was 21, and suddenly I was alone. I am so sorry. After that, I just could not see the point of staying in one place, around people who pitied me or expected me to move on and remarry. So I came west, went up into the mountains, and built a life where I did not have to explain myself to anyone. It has been 10 years now. Have you been happy?" Caleb considered the question. "Content, maybe, but not happy. I think I forgot what happy felt like." "And now?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them in that moment. Recognition, perhaps, understanding, the acknowledgement that two broken people had somehow found each other in the darkness. "Now I am remembering," he said quietly. The next morning, Caleb was scheduled to return to his cabin. His supplies were purchased, his business in town concluded. But as he packed his few belongings in his room, he found himself reluctant to leave. Eleanor had made such progress in just 5 days. What would happen when he was gone? Mrs. Hutchins found him in the parlor, staring out the window at the mountains in the distance. "You are not going to leave, are you?" she said. It was not really a question. "I should. I have trap lines to check, and winter is coming. I need to lay in my stores." "But you are not going to." Caleb sighed. "I do not know what to do. She has made such progress. I am afraid that if I leave, she will slip back into the terror." "Or," Mrs. Hutchins said gently, "you are afraid to leave because you care about her." "I barely know her." "Some people you know in a moment, Caleb. The heart does not always follow the timeline the head thinks it should. I'm twice her size, old enough to be her older brother, and I live in a cabin in the wilderness. What do I have to offer someone like her?" Maybe you should ask her what she thinks about that. When Eleanor came downstairs that evening, her eyes immediately found Caleb, and relief flooded her features. "You are still here." "I delayed my departure," he said. "I wanted to make sure you would be all right." "Oh," she looked down at her hands. "That is kind of you." They were both silent for a moment, the air thick with things unsaid. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "I will be honest with you, Caleb. The thought of you leaving terrifies me, not just because of the nightmares, though that is part of it, but because in these few days you have become the first person in 8 years who made me feel safe, who made me feel like maybe I could be whole again. Eleanor, he started, but she held up her hand. Let me finish. I know you have a life in the mountains. I know you probably see me as an obligation, a good deed to do before you return to your solitude. But I need you to know that you have given me the greatest gift anyone could. You have given me hope. Caleb crossed the room to stand before her, his large frame somehow not intimidating but comforting. You are not an obligation, he said. These past few days have meant more to me than I can properly express. You have reminded me that there is more to life than just existing. You have made me feel necessary, purposeful, in a way I have not felt since Sarah died. Then why are you leaving? Because I do not want to presume. Because you deserve someone who can offer you a real life with a real home, not a cabin in the mountains that is half buried in snow 6 months of the year. Eleanor reached up and placed her hand against his chest, feeling the solid beat of his heart beneath her palm. What if that is exactly the life I want? What if the only place I have ever felt truly safe is when you are near? You would give up the town, the chance to build a business, to have friends and community? What good is any of that if I cannot sleep at night, if I am too terrified to truly live? She looked up at him, her green eyes fierce. You said the burden is lighter when it is shared. I think the same is true of life. These past days have been the best I have had in 8 years, not just because you helped me sleep, but because I felt connected to someone, because I felt like I mattered to someone. You matter, Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. You matter so much that it scares me. Then stay. Or better yet, let me come with you. Teach me about the mountains. Let me learn to live without fear. It is a hard life. Eleanor, isolated and demanding? Harder than living every day in terror of the night? Harder than being so alone that you forget what it feels like to be happy? He had no answer to that. Instead, he did something he had not done in 10 years. He let himself be vulnerable, let himself hope. He cupped her face in his large calloused hands and looked into her eyes. If you come with me, I cannot promise it will be easy, but I can promise I will never let you face the darkness alone. I will stand watch over your sleep for as long as you need me. I will be your shelter in the storm. That's all I want, Eleanor whispered. That is everything I want. When Caleb kissed her, it was gentle and careful, as if she were something precious that might break. But Eleanor kissed him back with a fierceness that surprised them both, her hands gripping his shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. I guess I am not leaving after all, Caleb said with a small smile. I guess I am giving my notice at the dress shop, Eleanor replied. Mrs. Hutchins, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway with unabashed interest, clapped her hands together. Well, it is about time. I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever. The next week was a whirlwind of preparation. Eleanor gave her notice at the dress shop, though she promised to finish the orders she had already committed to. Caleb made arrangements for additional supplies they would need, things that would make the cabin more comfortable for 2 people. He also went to see the doctor who had been treating Eleanor, explaining the situation. The doctor, an older man named Dr. Patterson, listened carefully to everything Caleb described about the improvement in Eleanor's condition. What you have stumbled upon, Doctor, Patterson said, is actually sound medical practice. Many doctors who deal with war veterans who suffer similar terrors have recommended having someone present to interrupt the nightmares before they fully manifest. The problem is that few people have someone willing or able to do that for them. Will she always need it? Caleb asked. Will she always need someone to watch over her sleep? Honestly, I do not know. The mind is a mysterious thing. Some people find that with time and stability, the terrors fade. Others carry them for life. But what I can tell you is that you have given her something more valuable than any medicine I could prescribe. You have given her a sense of safety, and that is the foundation upon which healing can occur. I intend to keep her safe, Caleb said, for as long as she will have me. Doctor. Patterson smiled. I do not think you need to worry about that, Mr. Monroe. I have known Eleanor since she arrived in Silver Ridge, and I have never seen her look the way she does when she speaks of you. That young woman is not going anywhere." On the day they were to leave for the mountains, the entire boarding house turned out to see them off. Eleanor had sewn herself practical clothes for mountain living, sturdy wool skirts and warm shawls, and she had packed her sewing supplies carefully, determined to bring her skill with her to this new life. Caleb had acquired a gentle mare for her to ride, and his own horse was laden with supplies. Mrs. Hutchins hugged Eleanor fiercely. "You write to me," she commanded, "and if he does not treat you well, you come right back here." "He will treat me well," Eleanor said with certainty. "He already does." The journey to Caleb's cabin took 2 days. They rode through forests of aspen and pine, following trails that Eleanor would never have seen if she had not been with Caleb. He pointed out signs of wildlife, showed her how to read the forest, how to understand the language of the wilderness. At night, they camped under the stars, and when Eleanor's nightmares came, Caleb was there to wake her gently, to remind her where she was. But something was different now. The nightmares were shorter, less intense. Eleanor was able to wake herself more quickly, and she would turn to Caleb, finding comfort in his solid presence, in the way his arms came around her without hesitation. "I think the terrors are fading," she said on the second night, lying in his arms beneath a blanket of stars. "Or maybe I am just learning to be stronger than they are." "You were always strong," Caleb said. "You're just now realizing it." When they finally reached the cabin, Eleanor's first sight of it made her breath catch. It was perched on a mountainside, surrounded by towering pines with a view that stretched for miles. A stream ran nearby, its water clear and cold from the mountain snow. The cabin itself was solid and well built, larger than she had expected, with a stone fireplace and windows that let in the light. "You built this?" she asked in wonder. "Over several years, I kept adding to it, making it better. I guess part of me always hoped that someday I might have a reason to make it a home instead of just a shelter." Eleanor walked through the space, taking in the simple but well-made furniture, the neat organization that spoke of a man who lived deliberately. "It is perfect," she said. "It is absolutely perfect." That first night in the cabin, as Eleanor lay in the bed that Caleb had always slept in alone, she felt something she had not experienced in 8 years. Peace. When sleep came, it was deep and dreamless for nearly 5 hours. When the nightmare finally began, Caleb was there in an instant, just as he had promised. "You are safe," he murmured, pulling her close. "You are home, and you are safe." "Home," Eleanor repeated, and she realized it was true. This place, with this man, was the first place that had felt like home since she was 14 years old. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Caleb showed Eleanor how to manage in the mountains, how to read the weather, how to preserve food and gather herbs. Eleanor brought beauty to the cabin, sewing curtains for the windows, making cushions for the chairs, creating small touches of comfort and elegance in the wilderness. She also began sewing items they could trade when they went to town, beautiful quilts and embroidered linens that would fetch good prices. Every night, Caleb kept his vigil. Sometimes Eleanor slept peacefully for hours. Other times, the terrors came quickly. But always, Caleb was there, patient and steady, pulling her back from the darkness. One evening, about 2 months after they had arrived at the cabin, Eleanor was sitting by the fire sewing while Caleb cleaned his hunting rifle. Snow was falling softly outside, the first real snow of the season, and the cabin was warm and cozy. "I have been thinking," Eleanor said, not looking up from her work, "about what the doctor said before we left." "What is that?" "He said I might always have the terrors, or they might fade with time and stability. He said there was no way to know." "Does that worry you?" Eleanor set down her sewing and looked at him. "It did at first. I thought, what if I am a burden to you forever? What if you grow tired of staying awake night after night?" "Eleanor." "But then I realized something. I'm not afraid anymore. Not the way I was. The nightmares still come, but they do not control me. They do not define me. And that is because of you. Because you showed me what it means to feel safe." Caleb set aside his rifle and moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "You are not a burden. You are the reason I wake up eager for the day. You are the reason this cabin is a home and not just walls." "I love you," Eleanor said. The words came easily, naturally, as if they had been waiting inside her all along. "I know we have only known each other a short time, but I'm certain. I love you, Caleb Monroe." He stared at her, and she saw wonder in his dark eyes, as if she had given him something infinitely precious. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I think I started loving you that first night when you stood in that hallway, so brave even in your terror, and I've fallen deeper every day since." "Then I have a question for you," Eleanor said, her heart pounding. "Will you marry me?" Caleb laughed, a sound of pure joy that filled the cabin. "I think that is supposed to be my line. I do not care about convention. I know what I want, and I want you. I want this life. I want to build something here with you." "Then yes," Caleb said, pulling her from the chair and into his arms. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." They were married a month later, in a small ceremony in Silver Ridge, with Mrs. Hutchins and Dr. Patterson as witnesses. The preacher seemed somewhat bemused by the bride, who insisted on wearing a simple wool dress suitable for mountain living rather than traditional wedding finery, and the groom, whose shoulders were so broad he barely fit in the church doorway. But there was no doubting the love between them, the way they looked at each other as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. After the ceremony, they spent one night at the boarding house before returning to the mountains. That night, Eleanor slept in Caleb's arms as his wife, and when the nightmare came in the small hours of the morning, he woke her as he always did, gentle and patient. I am sorry," she whispered, still shaking from the dream. "I had hoped that maybe, on our wedding night, they would not come." "Do not apologize," Caleb said, holding her close. "This is part of who you are, part of what you have survived, and I am here for all of it, the easy parts and the hard parts. How did I ever find you? I think maybe we found each other, two people who needed to learn what it meant to not be alone." Winter settled over the mountains in earnest, and the world became a place of white silence, beautiful and harsh. Caleb taught Eleanor how to survive in this environment, how to read the snow and understand the dangers. She proved to be a quick learner, brave and determined. She also proved to be an excellent shot with a rifle, which delighted and impressed Caleb. "You are a natural," he said, after she successfully brought down a rabbit from a distance he would have thought challenging. "I have a good teacher," she replied with a smile that made his heart ache with love. The nightmares continued to come, but less frequently now. There were some nights when Eleanor slept through until dawn, peaceful and undisturbed. When this happened, Caleb would wake to find her still in his arms, her face serene, and he would thank whatever providence had brought them together. On the nights when the terrors came, he woke her as always, and they would talk quietly in the darkness. Eleanor spoke more and more about her family, about happy memories from before the tragedy. Caleb encouraged this, understanding instinctively that by reclaiming the good memories, she was taking back her past from the trauma that had overshadowed it. "My mother used to sing while she worked," Eleanor told him one night. "She had the most beautiful voice. She would sing hymns mostly, but sometimes folk songs. I've been so afraid to remember her because it hurt too much. But lately, I find myself humming her songs, and it does not hurt the way it did. It makes me feel close to her." "That is good," Caleb said, stroking her hair. "That is how it should be. I think she would have liked you, my father too. They would have appreciated how you take care of me, how you have given me a chance at a real life. I am the one who should be grateful. You have given me a reason to be more than just a man hiding in the mountains." As winter deepened, Caleb found himself marveling at how well Eleanor had adapted to mountain life. She did not complain about the cold or the isolation. Instead, she seemed to thrive in the quiet and solitude. She kept the cabin spotless and comfortable, cooked meals that amazed him with their flavor despite the limited ingredients, and spent her days sewing items of such beauty and craftsmanship that Caleb knew they would command high prices when they next went to town. But more than her practical skills, it was her spirit that amazed him. She laughed more now, real laughter that lit up her whole face. She would play in the snow like a child, making snowmen and having snowball fights with him, her cheeks pink with cold and joy. She would sit by the fire in the evenings reading aloud to him from the small collection of books they had, her voice bringing stories to life in a way that made him understand why she had wanted to be a teacher. One evening in late February, as they sat together after dinner, Eleanor spoke words that made Caleb's heart nearly stop. I think I am with child. He stared at her, unable to speak for a moment. You think? I'm fairly certain. All the signs are there. I have been keeping track, and I am nearly 2 months late with my courses, and I have been feeling unwell in the mornings. Caleb crossed to where she sat and knelt before her, placing his hands gently on her still flat stomach. A baby, he said wonderingly. Our baby. Are you happy? Eleanor asked, and there was uncertainty in her voice. I know we have not talked about children, and the cabin is small, and winter is still upon us. Happy? Caleb looked up at her, and there were tears in his eyes. Eleanor, I never thought I would have this. I never thought I would have a wife again, let alone a child. You have given me everything. She smiled, her own eyes wet with tears. I am frightened, she admitted, frightened of childbirth, frightened of being a mother, but I am also excited. This baby is proof that there is life after tragedy, that good things can still happen. You're going to be an amazing mother, Caleb said with certainty, and I'm going to do everything in my power to keep you both safe. I know you will. That night, the nightmare came particularly strong. Eleanor found herself back in the cellar, but this time the terror was worse because in the dream, she was not alone. There was a baby with her, crying, and the raiders were coming. She woke screaming, thrashing in Caleb's arms. The baby, she gasped. They were going to find the baby. There is no baby in danger, Caleb said firmly, holding her close. Our baby is safe, right here, protected inside you. No one is going to hurt our child. I promise you that. Eleanor clung to him, her whole body shaking. What if I cannot protect our baby? What if I fail like I failed my brothers? You did not fail your brothers. You were a child yourself, and you are not alone now. We will protect our baby together, you and me. It took a long time for Eleanor to calm down, and when she finally did, she was exhausted. Caleb held her until she fell back asleep, and then he stayed awake the rest of the night, his hand resting protectively on her stomach, silently vowing to whatever higher power might be listening that he would die before he let anything harm his wife or child. The next morning, Eleanor woke to find Caleb still holding her. You did not sleep at all, she said, seeing the weariness in his eyes. I needed to make sure you were all right. Caleb, you cannot do this. You need to sleep too. I will rest during the day, he said, but right now you need me more. We need you healthy, Eleanor corrected. Our baby needs a father who is strong and well. Please, you must take care of yourself too. Reluctantly, Caleb agreed to sleep for a few hours that day while Eleanor kept watch. It became a new pattern. Caleb would stay awake at night to watch over Eleanor's sleep and then rest during the day when she was awake and active. It was not perfect, but it worked. As the months passed and Eleanor's pregnancy progressed, the nightmares became less frequent. Some weeks she would have several terror-filled nights, but other weeks she would sleep peacefully. Dr. Patterson, who they visited when they made a trip to town in March, said this was not uncommon. Pregnancy can sometimes ease psychological symptoms, he explained. The body is focused on creating new life, and that can provide a sense of purpose that helps quiet the troubled mind. Or perhaps I am just finally healing, Eleanor said. Perhaps with Caleb beside me, I am learning that I can face my fears and survive them. That is even better, the doctor said with a smile. Either way, you are looking healthier than I have ever seen you, Eleanor. Mountain life clearly agrees with you. Mountain life with the right person agrees with me, she corrected, looking at Caleb with such love that the doctor had to look away, feeling like he was intruding on a private moment. They returned to the cabin as spring began to touch the mountains. The snow started to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath, and green shoots began to appear. Eleanor, her belly now visibly swollen with the growing baby, spent her days preparing for the child's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, soft and beautiful. Caleb built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving small designs into the headboard. One evening in late May, as they sat outside the cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Eleanor spoke thoughtfully. I have been thinking about names. Have you now? If it is a boy, I would like to name him James after my father, but only if you agree. I do not want to presume. James is a fine name, Caleb said, touched that she wanted to honor her father's memory this way. And if it is a girl? I was thinking Sarah, after your first wife. I know that might seem strange, but I have been thinking about how she was taken from you so young, before you could build a life together. Naming our daughter after her feels like a way of honoring that love, that loss. It does not diminish what we have. It acknowledges what came before. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. You are the most generous person I have ever known. Sarah would have liked you very much. And yes, if we have a daughter, I would be honored to name her Sarah. Eleanor took his hand and placed it on her belly. Feel that? The baby is moving. Caleb felt the flutter of life beneath his palm and was overcome with wonder. That's our child. That's our future, Eleanor said. Proof that life goes on, that love wins. The baby came in early June, arriving after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Caleb had ridden to Silver Ridge to fetch Dr. Patterson and Mrs. Hutchins when Eleanor's pains began, and they had made it to the cabin just in time. Caleb stayed by Eleanor's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring words of encouragement. When the baby finally arrived, a loud, healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his mother's green eyes, Caleb cried openly. He had thought himself too old, too hardened by life to cry, but holding his son for the first time broke something open inside him. "Hello, James," he said softly, looking down at the tiny face. "Welcome to the world, little man." Eleanor, exhausted but glowing with joy, reached for the baby. "Let me see our son." Dr. Patterson placed the baby in her arms, and Eleanor looked down at him with such fierce love that it took Caleb's breath away. "He is perfect," she whispered. "He is absolutely perfect." "You did so well," Caleb said, kissing her forehead. "You were so strong. I had you beside me. I can do anything with you beside me." Mrs. Hutchins, who had been assisting the doctor, wiped her own eyes. "Well, I must say this is the most beautiful birth I have ever attended, and in the mountains no less. This child is going to be strong and brave, just like his parents." That night, after the doctor and Mrs. Hutchins had left, promising to return in a few days to check on mother and baby, Caleb sat by the bed watching Eleanor nurse their son. He marveled at how natural she looked, how right this all felt. "Are you tired?" he asked. "Should I take him so you can sleep?" "I am exhausted," Eleanor admitted, "but I am also afraid to sleep. What if the nightmares come? What if I wake up screaming and frighten the baby? Then I will be here, just as I always am. I will wake you before it gets bad, and I will take care of James until you are ready. You are not alone in this, Eleanor. You will never be alone." She looked at him with such trust and love that he felt his heart swell. "What did I ever do to deserve you? You survived. You kept fighting. You chose to hope instead of despair. That is more than enough." Eleanor slept that night with baby James in a cradle beside the bed, and Caleb sat in a chair nearby, watching over both of them. The nightmare came around midnight, but it was different this time. Eleanor whimpered in her sleep, and Caleb woke her gently. She opened her eyes, disoriented, and immediately looked to the cradle. "James," she said. He is right here, safe and sleeping," Caleb assured her. "You are both safe." Eleanor relaxed, reaching out to rock the cradle gently. "I was dreaming about the raiders again, but this time I was not a child. I was myself now, and I had James, and I was able to protect him. I was not helpless. Because you are not helpless anymore. You are strong, Eleanor, stronger than you know." As the weeks passed and they settled into life as a family, the nightmares continued to fade. There were still difficult nights, times when the memories came back with full force, but they were becoming the exception rather than the rule. Eleanor was healing, slowly but surely, and the presence of baby James seemed to accelerate that healing. "I think having something to protect, someone who needs me, has given me a reason to be stronger than my fears," Eleanor told Caleb one evening. "I cannot afford to let the terrors control me anymore. I have a son who needs his mother to be present and whole." "You have always been whole," Caleb said. "You just needed time to remember that." Life in the cabin took on a new rhythm with James as part of it. Caleb proved to be a devoted father, surprising himself with how naturally he took to it. He would strap James to his chest in a carrier Eleanor had sewn and go about his daily tasks, talking to the baby constantly, telling him about the mountains and the animals and the way to read the weather. Eleanor would watch them together, her heart full to bursting. This was the life she had never let herself dream of after the tragedy. A husband who loved her, a child, a home, peace. One evening in late summer, nearly a year after Caleb had first heard Eleanor scream in the boarding house, they sat outside the cabin watching James play with pine cones on a blanket. The baby was nearly 3 months old now, healthy and happy, already showing signs of his father's strength in the way he gripped things with surprising force. "Do you remember that first night?" Eleanor asked, "when I had a terror and you came out into the hallway?" "I remember thinking I had never heard anyone sound so frightened and lost," Caleb said, "and I remember feeling compelled to help, even though it was not my place. I'm so grateful you did not mind your own business. If you had just gone back to your room and ignored me, we would not be here now." "I think we would have found each other eventually," Caleb said. "Some things are meant to be." Eleanor leaned against him, fitting perfectly into the curve of his arm. "I had another dream last night, but it was not a nightmare. I dreamed about my family, about my parents and brothers. But they were not dying. They were here, with us, and they were happy. They were telling me they were proud of me, that they wanted me to live and be happy. When I woke up, I was not afraid. I was at peace." "That is beautiful," Caleb said softly. "I think I am finally learning to forgive myself for surviving, to accept that my life did not end that night. It just changed direction. And maybe all of this, all the pain and fear, led me exactly where I was supposed to be, to you, to James, to this life." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Eleanor Monroe." "And I love you, Caleb Monroe. Thank you for staying up all those nights. Thank you for teaching me that I could sleep without fear. Thank you for showing me what it means to be loved." As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, the three of them sat together, a family forged in the darkness but living fully in the light. James babbled happily, reaching for the stars that were beginning to appear. Eleanor laughed, a sound of pure joy. And Caleb held them both close, silently thanking whatever force had brought him down from his mountain solitude at exactly the right moment to hear a woman scream and recognize it for what it was, a call for help he could not ignore. The years that followed brought more children, 2 daughters they named Sarah and Grace, and another son they called Daniel. The cabin was expanded twice to accommodate the growing family, and eventually Caleb and Eleanor became known throughout the region as the couple who had built a life of remarkable happiness in the mountains. Eleanor's nightmares never disappeared completely, but they became rare enough that she could go months without one. And when they did come, Caleb was always there, just as he had promised that very first night. He would wake her gently, remind her where she was, and hold her until the fear passed. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked him once many years later. They were in their 40s now, watching their children play in the meadow near the cabin. "Do you ever wish you had stayed alone in the mountains without all the noise and chaos of family life?" Caleb looked at her as if she had asked the most absurd question imaginable. "Not for a single moment. You and these children are the best thing that ever happened to me. You saved my life just as much as I saved yours." "How did I save you?" "You reminded me what it meant to be human, to care about something more than just surviving. You gave me purpose and meaning and love. Without you, I would have eventually become just another lonely old man who died alone in the mountains and was not found until the next spring thaw." Eleanor laughed, though there were tears in her eyes. "That is quite dramatic, but true. You saved me, Eleanor. Never doubt that." In the autumn of 1898, when Caleb was in his late 50s and Eleanor in her early 40s, they received word that Mrs. Hutchins had passed away peacefully in her sleep. They made the journey to Silver Ridge for the funeral, bringing their youngest children with them. The older ones had already begun to make their own lives, James working as a guide for hunters in the mountains, Sarah married to a rancher, and Grace studying to be a teacher. At the funeral, they saw Dr. Patterson, who was quite elderly now, but still practicing medicine. He greeted them with genuine warmth. "I often think about the two of you," he said, "about how you defied all the conventional medical wisdom about Eleanor's condition. You found a cure that no doctor had prescribed, love and dedication, and the simple act of not letting her face the darkness alone." "It was not really a cure," Eleanor said. "I still have nightmares sometimes, but Caleb taught me that I am stronger than my fears, and that has made all the difference." "That, Doctor," Patterson said, "is the best medicine there is." On the ride back to their mountain home, with young Daniel and their 14-year-old daughter Rose riding alongside them, Eleanor reflected on how far she had come from that terrified young woman in the boarding house. "Do you remember what you said to me that first morning?" she asked Caleb, "after you had watched over my sleep for the first time?" "I said a lot of things that morning. You said that maybe we were meant to find out why I survived. You said I survived for a reason." "I remember. I think I finally know what that reason was. I survived so I could learn what real love means, so I could build this family, so I could show our children that even the worst tragedies do not have to define your entire life. You can heal. You can find happiness again. You can build something beautiful from the ashes." Caleb reached over and took her hand. "And I came down from my mountain at exactly the right time to hear you cry for help. If I had delayed my trip by even a day, I might have missed you." "Fate," Eleanor said, "or providence, or pure luck. Whatever it was, I am grateful." That night, back in their cabin with the familiar mountains rising all around them, Eleanor slept peacefully in Caleb's arms. There were no nightmares, no terrors from the past. There was only the steady beat of her husband's heart, the soft breathing of their youngest children in the next room, and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Caleb, for his part, stayed awake for a while longer, as had become his habit over the years. Not because Eleanor needed him to, but because watching her sleep peacefully, her face serene and untroubled, never ceased to fill him with wonder and gratitude. This woman, who had been so broken when he met her, had become the strongest person he knew, and he had been privileged to witness her transformation, to be part of her healing. As he finally let himself drift off to sleep, his last conscious thought was a simple one. He would stay up 1,000 more nights if that was what she needed. He would watch over her sleep for the rest of their lives if it meant she could know peace, because that was what love meant, not grand gestures or flowery words, but the simple, profound act of staying present in the darkness, so the person you love does not have to face it alone. And in the morning, when Eleanor woke beside him and smiled that smile that still made his heart skip a beat after more than 2 decades together, he knew with absolute certainty that every sleepless night had been worth it, every moment of vigilance, every interrupted dream, every time he had pulled her back from the edge of terror. It had all led to this: a life well lived, a love well earned, and the knowledge that they had saved each other in all the ways that mattered. Their story became something of a legend in the mountain communities, told around fires and passed down through generations. The tale of the mountain man with muscles like iron and a heart even stronger, who had heard a woman scream in the night and chosen to help rather than ignore. The story of the woman who survived unspeakable tragedy and learned to live again with the help of a man who refused to let her face her demons alone. But for Caleb and Eleanor themselves, it was never a story or a legend. It was simply their life, built one night at a time, one moment of courage at a time, one act of love at a time. They had found each other in the darkness and had chosen every single day to walk toward the light together. And when they were old and gray, sitting on the porch of their mountain cabin, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, they would sometimes catch each other's eyes and smile, remembering that first terrible scream, that first gentle awakening, that first moment when they had recognized in each other a kindred spirit, someone worth fighting for, worth staying awake for, worth building a life with. Eleanor's night terrors never completely vanished, but they no longer ruled her life. They were simply part of her story, part of what had shaped her into the woman she became. And Caleb remained her faithful guardian, even in their twilight years, ready to wake her gently if the nightmares came, ready to remind her that she was safe, that she was loved, that she was home. In the end, that was the greatest gift they gave each other, not the elimination of fear or pain, but the assurance that neither of them would ever have to face the darkness alone again. They had found each other against all odds, in a small boarding house in a mountain town in 1876, and they had built a love that lasted a lifetime. And every night, as Caleb held Eleanor close and watched the stars wheel overhead through their bedroom window, he whispered the same words he had spoken that very first night in the hallway, the words that had become their truth. "You are safe. I am right here, and nothing is going to hurt you." And Eleanor, secure in the shelter of his arms, would close her eyes and sleep, knowing that if the terrors came, he would be there to pull her back, knowing that she had found in this mountain man with the gentle hands and the fierce heart exactly what she had needed most. Someone who would stay up all night so she could sleep, someone who would watch over her dreams, someone who would love her through the darkness and into the light. Their love story was not one of convenience or circumstance alone, but one of choice. Every day they chose each other. Every night, Caleb chose to stay awake. Every morning, Eleanor chose to trust that she was worthy of such devotion. And in those choices, repeated over decades, they had created something rare and precious, a love that not only endured but flourished, growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. As the seasons turned and the mountains watched over them with their ancient, patient presence, Caleb and Eleanor Monroe lived out their days in the wilderness they had made their own. They faced hardships, as all people do, times when money was tight or illness struck or the winters were particularly harsh. But they faced everything together, and that made all the difference. Their children grew up knowing what real love looked like, what it meant to be committed to another person not just in the easy times, but in the difficult ones too. They learned that strength was not just physical, though their father certainly had that in abundance, but emotional and spiritual as well. They learned from their mother that survival was not enough, that you had to fight for the life you wanted, that healing was possible even from the worst wounds. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the family gathered around the fireplace, the children would ask their parents to tell them again how they met. They never tired of the story, of their father's decision to help a stranger in distress, of their mother's courage in choosing to trust, of the nights spent in vigilant protection, and the mornings that brought new hope. And the best thing I ever did, Caleb would say, holding Eleanor's hand, was decide that someone else's pain mattered more than my comfort. The best thing your mother ever did was believe that she was worth saving. We saved each other, Eleanor would add. That is the truth of it. He gave me the safety I needed to heal, and I gave him the purpose he needed to live again. Neither of us would be who we are without the other. In 1920, when Caleb was 77 and Eleanor was 65, they celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary surrounded by their ever-expanding family. It was a joyous occasion, filled with food and laughter and music. As the sun set and the party wound down, Caleb and Eleanor took a walk together, just the two of them, up the trail to an overlook they had always loved. Do you ever think about how different our lives would have been if we had never met? Eleanor asked, her hair now white as snow but her green eyes still as vibrant as ever. I try not to, Caleb admitted. His hair was also white, his body not as strong as it once was, but still sturdy and capable. Because the alternative is too bleak to imagine. A life without you, without our children, without all of this, it would not have been a life at all, just existence. I was thinking earlier about that girl I was, the one who could not sleep, who was so consumed by fear and trauma. I wish I could go back and tell her that everything was going to be all right, that she would survive, that she would find love and peace and a reason to keep going. I think she knew, Caleb said. Somewhere deep inside, I think she knew. Otherwise, she would have given up. But she kept going, kept getting up every morning, even though the nights were torture. That took incredible strength. Eleanor leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her, just as he had done thousands of times before. I love you, Caleb Monroe. Thank you for staying awake all those nights. Thank you for refusing to let me face the darkness alone. I love you, Eleanor Monroe. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for letting me be part of your healing. Thank you for giving me a life worth living. They stood there as the stars began to appear, the same stars they had watched together for more than 4 decades. The mountains rose around them, eternal and unchanging, and in that moment, they were simply two people who had found each other against all odds and had chosen, every day since, to love and be loved. When they finally made their way back to the cabin, walking slowly but steadily, they found their family waiting for them, faces illuminated by lamplight and firelight. There was laughter and warmth and the undeniable sense of belonging that comes from being surrounded by people who love you unconditionally. That night, as they lay in bed with the sounds of their family settling down for the night all around them, Eleanor whispered, I do not think I will have any nightmares tonight. No? Caleb asked, pulling her close. No, I feel too full of love and gratitude for fear to find a foothold. But even if I do, I know you will be here. Always, Caleb promised. For as long as I draw breath, I will be here. And he was. Through the remaining years they had together, through the gradual slowing of age, through the inevitable losses and sorrows that come with a long life, Caleb kept his promise. He watched over Eleanor's sleep, and she provided him with purpose and meaning and joy that never dimmed. When Caleb passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1923, at the age of 80, he died with Eleanor's hand in his, their children and grandchildren gathered around. His last words were, "I stayed awake long enough. I think I can rest now." Eleanor lived for another 7 years, and though she missed Caleb with an ache that never fully eased, she did not let grief consume her. She remained active and engaged with her family, teaching her grandchildren to sew, telling them stories about the old days, making sure they understood the legacy of love and courage that their grandparents had built. The nightmares returned after Caleb died, more frequent and intense than they had been in years. But Eleanor had learned, over the course of 5 decades, how to survive them. She would wake herself, just as Caleb had taught her to do, and she would talk herself through the fear, reminding herself where she was, that she was safe, that the terrors were just memories and could not hurt her anymore. And sometimes, in the darkness of those difficult nights, she would feel what seemed like a familiar presence, solid and reassuring. She would remember the weight of Caleb's hand on her shoulder, the sound of his voice calling her back from the nightmares, and she would smile through her tears. "I am all right," she would whisper to the darkness. "You taught me how to be all right. You can rest now. I can carry on from here." When Eleanor passed away in her sleep in 1930, at the age of 75, her family found her with a peaceful expression on her face and a smile on her lips. They said it looked like she had finally gone to join someone she had been missing, someone who had been waiting patiently for her to finish her work in this world so they could be together again. The cabin in the mountains remained in the family for generations, a testament to the love that had been built there. And the story of Caleb and Eleanor Monroe was passed down through the years, a reminder that the greatest acts of love are often the simplest ones, staying present in the darkness, refusing to let someone face their fears alone, and choosing every single day to be there for the person you love. It was a story about night terrors and the mountain man who stayed up all night so his beloved could sleep. But more than that, it was a story about healing and hope, about the power of steadfast love to transform even the deepest wounds, and about 2 people who found in each other exactly what they needed most, a reason to keep going, a safe harbor in the storm, and a love that lasted not just a lifetime but beyond it, into whatever came next. Their love had been tested by trauma and terror, by isolation and hardship, by all the challenges that life in the Wild West of the late 1800s could throw at them. But it had endured and flourished because it was built on a foundation of mutual respect, unwavering commitment, and the simple but profound act of being present for each other, day after day, night after night, year after year. And in the end, that was the true miracle of their story. Not that Caleb had stayed awake to protect Eleanor from her nightmares, though that was remarkable enough. The real miracle was that they had created, together, a life so full of love and meaning that the nightmares, while never completely vanquished, had lost their power to destroy. They had built something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy, and they had shown everyone who knew them that healing was possible, that love could triumph over even the darkest past, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply refusing to let them face their demons alone.